All right. Welcome, everybody. Good evening. It's a real pleasure to welcome everyone to this evening's event with the New Hampshire Network for Environment, Energy, and Climate. Thank you all so much for joining us. It is really gratifying that lots of New Hampshireites and Granite Staters want to know more about climate change in our state, and in particular, what we can do about it. I am Reinmar Zeidler, member and co-manager of the New Hampshire Network for Environment, Energy, and Climate. I live in Cornish, New Hampshire, and I teach graduate and undergraduate classes in sustainability science and climate change at the University of Massachusetts in Boston. The New Hampshire Network was established just a bit over a year ago, the goal being to facilitate coordination among individuals and organizations in New Hampshire who are concerned about issues in environment, energy, and climate, and especially to help raise the profile of these critical issues in policy discussions at the state level. And events like tonight's are one way in which we are trying to contribute to that goal. Tonight's event is a follow-up to our March 14th event, in which we heard from two prominent New Hampshire climatologists about their research findings being published this month in an updated state climate assessment report. The potential future scenarios they described based on their analyses of information from a lot of different sources ranged from scenarios in which the climate changes in New England are noticeable but not
I think I'm okay.
manageable. To scenarios in which impacts are intense, even potentially chaotic. We should always keep in mind that these projections are always if-then statements, which depend more than anything on what we do as a society and as a global community over the next few years and decades.
Or Heather, did you want a birthday card for
well,
her?
before I go on, I just want to say, could we all please mute?
Oh, yeah, the Easter card.
Yes.
And it was your
people who are not on mute
person that
need to be
you
on mute.
gave a little advice to that was not watching.
Oh, yes. Exactly. So
okay, this is the issue with Zoom meetings as opposed to webinars. In meetings, everybody can potentially be heard if they don't stay on mute. So please, let's remember to do that to minimize interruptions. So in view of these potential scenarios, which are not necessarily very pleasant, it's really critical that we ramp up the societal conversation about the solutions. And tonight's event examines one of the core suggested solutions. Now, I just need to mention a few housekeeping items before I introduce our tonight's moderator, my esteemed colleague, John Gage. And first of all, let me remind everyone that this event takes place in Ndakina, the ancestral homeland of the Abenaki, Pennacook, and Wabanaki peoples, past and present. We acknowledge and we honor with gratitude the land, the waterways, and the people who have stewarded Ndakina throughout the generations. Secondly, the Zoom meeting issue and the mute issue, that is something to keep in mind. Thank you all very much. And now I am extremely pleased to introduce tonight's moderator. John Gage is one of the network's most active members. After a 30-year career as an introverted software engineer, is how he describes it, with Sun Microsystems and with Oracle. John found himself getting increasingly concerned about climate change. He educated himself on the science and on the politics of climate and got involved as a concerned citizen, eventually becoming New Hampshire State Coordinator for Citizens Climate Lobby, an excellent organization which works to get climate onto the legislative agenda at state and at national level. So John, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you so much, Reimer. And thank you, everybody. If everybody could please mute their selves, then we can not have interruptions. Thank you. Okay, I just pasted a straw poll link into chat, and I want to start this off finding what you think is the most impactful thing you can do as an individual to help address climate change. This is just an opinion poll, and I'm doing it to just kind of test the waters to see what people think. So click on that link in chat, and I will share my screen, and we can watch the results come in. Great. While they do that, I'll just give a little brief agenda. We're going to see a wonderful interactive climate policy demonstration using the Inroads tool by MIT and Climate Interactive. And then we'll find one of the policies, the most powerful policy of all. We'll dive into listening to a local New Hampshire economist, a leading economist at Dartmouth, who will talk about the way to use this policy to its utmost. And then at the end, we'll finish up with some actions that we can all take to help create the political will to enable Congress to significantly reduce our carbon emissions. As Reimer said, this is a follow-up from the 2 weeks ago state climate expert event. But also the IPCC released the second volume of its latest assessment report, in which there were some standout things in the report. The IPCC says the cumulative scientific evidence is unequivocal. Climate change is a threat to human well-being and planetary health. Any further delay in concerted, anticipatory global action on adaptation and mitigation will miss a brief and rapidly closing window of opportunity to secure a livable and sustainable future for all. Really, the stakes could not be higher. As the importance and likelihood of enacting strong climate policies increases, we all need to understand our options and support leaders enacting the policies that will be the best for the climate, the people, and the economy. They must reduce carbon emissions rapidly, protect Americans financially, ensure that our businesses can compete on a level playing field in the global market, and have an influence on emissions on a global scale. Okay, so where do we end up? Well, we got a lot of votes for help Congress pass effective legislation. A lot for reduce my own carbon footprint also. March and climate strike got some votes, and work on a technological solution. Well, these are all important things to do, and we should all be doing all of them. So you can't get this question wrong, of course. But I'm convinced, and the IPCC is convinced, that we will not be able to meet our most ambitious climate objectives if we don't include carbon pricing. So we're going to explore all of our options, and then we're going to dive in to one of the most powerful one, according to experts. So we decided to call this event, Is Net Zero by 2050 Possible? There's technical possibilities, and there's political possibilities. And I think to answer that question, we really need to consider it from both angles. Inroads is a great way to look at the technical possibilities, using policies at a global scale to get emissions reductions and carbon sinks working for us. And then
Hey, John, these graphs are great, but you've got some windows obscuring them. It looks like a long skinny one on the right. So I don't know. Yeah, there you go. That would help. Thank you so much.
I didn't think you could see those. Okay, so the IPCC's special report on 1.5 degrees of global warming included this graph, which is where the term net zero by 2050 came from. The studies in that report, and this illustrates that. You can see these are billion of billions of tons of carbon dioxide emissions on the vertical axis and time on the horizontal axis. And here's 2050. And you can see these are emissions reductions pathways to hold warming to 1.5 degrees, which is the COP26 warming target. One of the things that really stands out from this graph is the later we start, even just by several years, the more work we have to do in the second half of the century. This is a burden we are passing on to the next generation. We really need to get started immediately with rapid emissions reductions early so that there's less work to do in the second half of the century. Another academic look at what we can do is Project Drawdown. This categorizes the top 100 methods to reduce carbon emissions and draw carbon dioxide out of the air, both of which are necessary to meet our ambitious climate goals. Project Drawdown breaks the technical solutions down by sector, and you can drill down into electricity, food, agricultural land use, industry, transportation, buildings, and others. These are all technical solutions, and they categorize how many millions of tons of carbon dioxide can be prevented from being emitted or sequestered in each of these things. But the standout problem is that business as usual will not get us where we need to be. Business as usual is a high emissions pathway. Doing everything that we're doing right now with good efforts by millions of individuals around the world is a high emissions pathway. And that's where we need to talk about policies. How can we accelerate doing the things that we need to do in order to get the emissions reductions that we must have? So I'm very happy to introduce John Kondos, who's going to give us our Inroads demonstration to find the best policy options. This tool is from MIT Sloan School of Management and Climate Interactive. John Kondos started his career in the renewable energy industry in the late 1970s, with the goal of making a practical contribution to reducing our dependence on fossil fuels. He has installed photovoltaic systems on 3 continents and solar water heaters in Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and Vermont. John is a founder of the Monadnock Energy Hub. He is also president of Home Efficiency Resources, a company in the Monadnock region that provides advanced building energy efficiency assessments and renewable energy systems to provide comfort, save money, and reduce climate pollution. He has a master's in international management from the Thunderbird School of Global Management. Take it away, John.
Sorry. Thank you, John. It's a great pleasure to be here, and I hope that we can share with everyone some insights into policies that really work. For the last decade, I've been focused completely on trying to reduce greenhouse gases, both in the nonprofit sector and in restarting my business, because I feel like this is the most important task I can undertake. So let me give you a little background about the Inroads software so we know what we're using this tool, which is really quite extraordinary. I'm very pleased to be a trained Inroads ambassador, and I love sharing this with people. I normally would do this in about an hour presentation, so we're going to have a very abbreviated version. You'll have to, bear with that, and apologize for not letting more of you interact and run this, but I will, in lieu of the time frame, do it for you. It is a decision-making tool. It's designed to be very cross-disciplinary, and that's the magnificent part about it. It bases itself on and is validated against a large variety of other modeling systems across not only these kinds of policies, but also the climate and the impact on the climate. Created by a consortium, basically Climate Interactive is the entity that is the prime driver of this. They're affiliated with MIT and Ventana Systems. As I say, it's been vetted against and is continuously vetted against other models as all of these, including this one, are updated. This has gone through a major update in the 2 years that I've been working with it. as well as some lesser updates. There are approximately 14,000 calculations that are being processed behind the scenes when we do some of the we move some of these levers. So what we're looking at here is the business as usual scenario. This is that 3.6 C or 6.5 Fahrenheit temperature increase at the end of the century is sort of the target that we're looking at. This is what happens if we just keep on keeping on. And I won't go off on a great tangent on that subject right now. I'll try to stay focused on this. What I want to do is try to give you some idea of what works. But before I do that, I'm going to give you some ideas of what doesn't work. And as a business person, I'm always fascinated by greenwashing. We know that it's, we all know what that term means. It's when businesses say that what they're doing is going to solve this problem. And one of the great ones that people talk about is afforestation. So what happens with this is every time you want to you have decided to choose something, you move the lever, and somebody can mute themselves. I'm going to move this lever all the way, which of course is a dramatic effort to do that. And we can look at what that entails. But the real point of that is I've just planted trees over 90% of the available acreage worldwide. That's the other thing I should have been very clear about. This is a global model. This is not specific to the United States. So that was approximately 90% of the potential land that doesn't have trees being planted with trees. And you see what happened. We lost 1/10 of a degree Celsius. So you go, okay, well, why? Why wouldn't, if we plant all those trees, we know trees absorb carbon, why doesn't that work? You know, what's going on here? And what happens is, I'm replaying it, but if you notice, the activity, the decline doesn't even start till out here in the 2060 timeframe. And that's because trees take a long time to grow and reach a maturity level where they're going to be able to absorb carbon. So planting trees is analogous to, at this stage in the game, at where we are today, I consider it greenwashing. Now, I'm going to, again, this is where I would normally ask folks to, to suggest things. So I'm going to do that for you again a few times just to show you some different things. Now, I drive an electric vehicle, have for 3 years, and I'm going to tell you, it is better technology. Not only is it 3 times more efficient, and as an efficiency expert, that makes a lot of difference to me, but electrification of transport, everybody should be driving an EV. It's more fun. So, I mean, I don't know if you like to drive, but I do, and it's a better transportation system. But whoops, we only did, again, about 1/10 of a degree. Now, why would that be? I mean, electric vehicles are 3 times more efficient, and they use there's no combustion of fossil fuels. Again, it's going to take a while for that to happen, so the real implication is here. But I want people to look at this side of the chart for a minute. These are the sources of energy. So you're looking at coal, oil, natural gas, and then renewables is the green, and then we have bioenergy, et cetera. So when we electrify transportation, if we don't do anything about the sources, you don't see a big difference. You know, oil goes down, but coal doesn't change much at all. In fact, coal may go up a little because we're going to use electricity. And we haven't done anything to penalize coal. So just going electric on our vehicles isn't going to work. That's too bad. My other favorite thing, of course, because I'm getting to play with this, I'll show you one of my other favorites. Well, I'm sorry, that's transportation. Let's do building efficiency. That's more what I really meant to do. We did electric transportation. Let's try building efficiency. Ooh, now that just moved the needle a little more. So that's a more powerful tool. Building efficiency, you know, we're hitting 4/10 of a degree there by the end of the century. That's good. And you notice what it does, and this is the exciting part from my perspective, all of the energy sources go down. We're using less energy because our buildings, which are a huge part of our carbon footprint collectively, are using a whole lot less energy. So makes sense, right? Beginning to see how this works. Now, a lot of people like to try other things, and I know one favorite for some people is let's just get rid of coal, let's ban coal, which of course I think that would be pretty hard to do in India and China and a few other countries that depend upon coal, because again, this is global, so it's not just the United States. And you can see it does drop a couple of tenths of a degree by the end of the century. And given the sheer problematical political effort to ban coal, even if we could do it, 0.2 of a degree isn't going to really do much for us. So I've kind of poked around here. And if you haven't noticed already, this side over here is energy supply. We had the transport part we played with, a little buildings and industry. I don't like to delve into growth with population controls and dealing with economic growth. I find those to be very politically problematical. Land and industry, we haven't really talked very much about yet. And then there's carbon removal, which of course we did look at afforestation of planting trees, but what we haven't touched is technological. And I'm going to now, at this stage of the game, begin to move into some, the other side of the coin. Okay, now that I know how this works and it's been working with it for a couple of years, I'm going to try to pull just a few levers and see if we can have a big impact. We've got to get this down well under 2 and closer to 1.5. So ironically, and I'll be honest, true full disclosure here, I was a founding member of the first chapter of CCL in New Hampshire, and discovered CCL and was quite in awe because I had come to the conclusion through my research that carbon pricing was a very powerful tool. But I, like a lot of people, had all kinds of ideas. Well, how do you do it? What do you do? And how does it work? And what do you do with the money and all that stuff? And carbon pricing was made clear. I can't recommend that high enough. But let's pull the carbon pricing lever out of the way. Whoa. Did everybody notice that? 3.6 down to 2.6. We got a full degree Celsius by really extreme carbon pricing. Again, probably not going to be able to do that in every case, but it's an extraordinarily powerful tool. I'm going to do a few more levers, and then I want to just show you a little bit behind the scenes because there is so much to this software that we can't possibly do in this time frame. But I'm going to continue on this path. We have just made an enormous dent. We just did something major. Now, one of the other things that's really critical to understand is methane and other gases. And I'm going to drill down on this one in a minute, but for now, just trust me. We're going to do some things about methane. And thankfully, at the recent COP meetings, there was a commitment to doing something about methane. Made another big dent. We are now already at 2.2, which is pretty big progress. And then I'm going to say, we have put so much carbon into the atmosphere. It's billions of tons a year, and it's accelerating, unfortunately, at least in some places. So we are going to have to suck some out. Now, we just got down to 2 with just a bit of that. How far can we go? Can we get there all the way with this? All right, so these 3 levers taken to the max, which of course, again, politically is probably unrealistic. But those 3 levers give us the potential to get almost all the way there. And so then if we can do some things with electrification, we can get down to the 1.5 as an example. There's other levers that we could pull that would get us to 1.5. So at this point, we should all clap and celebrate, because I would be doing this and you would be requesting the levers. But at the end of the day, we have just accomplished what scientists tell us we really need to do. So now I want you to understand a little more about this. First, I think the good news is here, we can get to 1.5. The other good news, though it's more complicated, is there is no silver bullet. Much as I love carbon pricing by itself, it won't do it, nor will any one of these others, because it's the most powerful. And I stress that because it's a foundational policy. The beauty of carbon pricing is it reduces all these dirty fuels by definition, because they become increasingly more expensive. It also encourages investment in clean energy on a scale that we need and is slowly but surely happening. But at this stage of the game, far too much investment money still goes into dirty fuels and other places. A carbon price will push an enormous thrust of investment into clean energy. So keeping the clock in mind, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back, reset the table here. And what I want to do is these little dots here represent the background. So on every one of these, you can drill down and do this. And then you can say, okay, well, what are we going to do about methane? And I think methane is an important one because I think most everyone here knows that it's an extremely potent greenhouse gas, far more so than carbon. And it also has a shorter lifetime. So by stopping methane now, we have a much greater bang for our buck short term. So you can do a lot of things here. There's this little I button, that's the information. And this tells us what we're talking about here. So there you see the first one, decrease meat consumption. And I know that's an important thing for many of us. And it makes a lot of sense, as we know, and that's part of decreasing, excuse me, our methane production. Modified agricultural practices, and there's a lot of great stuff that's being explored there. There's a lot of potential there. And then obviously the third one to me is a no-brainer, is decreasing leakage and losses in the oil and gas industry. I mean, this is a product that they're trying to sell and they're letting it escape into the atmosphere by not being efficient. So just by plugging the leaks, they can have an enormous impact, and we don't have to shut off the gas immediately because, as Europe knows, we sure as heck can't afford to shut off the gas because that's what keeps us warm and keeps the lights on for too many of us. And true here in New England as well. And then increased capturing of it from landfills, for example, more work can be done there. And obviously more research and development on the F gases, which are the various industrial gases, which are bundled here with methane in this example. And then over here, we can look at ways like, this is what happens when I was pulling the lever before. So how much are we going to reduce? You can see I'm going 30, 40, 50. Let me just go all the way, hit my button. And so there we saw from 3.6 down to 3.1, if we can get rid of 99% of the methane gases. So you get a sense of how that works. And you can, so you don't have to do it the way I was doing it before up at those levers. You can come down here and reset different criteria. You can get into the ag side. And I'm not going to do all this because we don't have time. You can decide when it happens. So there's a tremendous amount of opportunity here. And that's true for any one of these. You know, you can go into energy efficiency. Let's do that for transport just really quickly. And you can see that we can make it very quickly, and we can decide when it starts. And those are all critical dimensions of how the problem is resolved. So in keeping with our time schedule, I just want to reiterate that there's no silver bullet, and that carbon pricing is a foundational policy. It's really the basis upon which everything else really is effective. And I could display that more with more time and more time to play with the different levers. But at the end of the day, this is a very brief and quick overview of this very powerful tool, and anyone can look at it. I am going to show you one other thing, which I think is very interesting, and indulge me for a minute. And unfortunately, that's this one. If you have coastal property, you should be wary. I mean, if you can see what happens, we're talking about, and I can, for those who are more comfortable with, I'm sorry, view, with US units than feet, I'll change that. So now you're looking at business as usual, says a 2.5 foot sea level rise. And if we can go back to what that opportunity that I showed you before, getting us down to 1.5. What happened? Oh, because I mean, we are at 1.7, and I think I did it with buildings to get us down to the 1.6, 1.5. So there we are. We have already created a very bad scenario. We're looking at somewhere, if we can get to down to the 1.5 degrees Celsius, we're still looking at close to 1.5 feet of sea level rise. And these graphs, there are all of these different ones. You can, we've been doing temperature. You can look at net greenhouse gases. You can look at the cost of energy. You can look at sources. All of this is available to you with this wonderful software. So I think, John, I should probably stop talking and let people address some questions, I think, if I'm not
That would be
mistaken.
terrific. We do have a number in there, and Susan and Reimar, you can look for them. I saw a couple go by that I will say, and then you can follow up. So the first question that I saw was about plastics. Are they modeled in En-ROADS in any way?
Plastic, you mean the plastic consumption? Not per se. I mean, it's another pollutant. This is focused on the greenhouse gases. So again, the primary gases that they're looking at are carbon dioxide, methane, and the F gases, which are, you know, a variety of ones used in air conditioners and industrial processes. So
I think that's an important clarification for people, that when you make a plastic, it's the solid and it ends up being pollution, but unless it gets burned, it doesn't turn into carbon dioxide and act as a warming agent in the air. Of course, the production of plastic, I think, has a lot of emissions that probably are.
Right, John, I think the questioner was correct in asking about the production processes of plastic, which do contribute vastly.
right. And that would really be part of essentially the production of any of these energy sources again. So when we look at that, you know that plastics come from petroleum products. So gas and oil are the primary sources of those. So anything that reduces these, including elimination or dramatic reductions of plastics, would show up here.
There are two questions about methane. The first, I think you covered with meat, with the methane and other gases drill down that you did. But Joe Kwasnick asked an interesting question. Does this model the methane that will be released naturally, the increasing methane releases that are happening naturally? Or is that just a feedback?
Right. I mean, this is primarily looking at the human caused, meaning including agriculture. I mean, we're taking credit for what we do. So that the unknowns are what happens with permafrost melting and things like that with methane releases. Those are less secure. This model works with the best known science at the time, but it's not speculating about what might happen. And so that would be an example of still being figured out. So
I think that's one of the scary things about climate change is we don't know exactly these tipping points because we've never experimented with the Earth like this before.
Right, exactly.
One question that probably affects everyone here is, can we get access to this software? Can we play with it at home?
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. I thought I made that clear up front. I mean, this is
Okay.
available, climateinteractive.org. If you can see the website there, or someone can put it in the chat. And yes, it's really something that anyone can play with. I mean, I've been through a training program and I've lost count how many of these kinds of workshops, long ones and short ones. The ideal that they trained us to do was a 1 hour workshop, which of course had some of the things that were covered in the last section with, sort of setting the table with what's going on with the problem. And then a good bit of this, and the emphasis is to let people actually decide what levels to the participants to pull the levers, not having me do it all for you. But this was a very concise one, but anyone can go in and do this. And as I say, I tried to show you some of the highlights. These those little dots open up this whole pantheon of things for each one of the items. And then there's the information button. There's lots more stuff here. And as I mentioned before, there's all these graphs that you can explore. So, and then the basic thing, this goes back to where you were before. There's your home button. And this one is the cool one. So when I do something, I just kind of let people see it one more time. I'm going to pull a lever. And then this little double circle one allows you to see, it plays itself over a couple of times. And that allows you to look at what's happening here. And I could have a different graph over here so I could see its effect on other things. So it has a lot of neat features. But yes, anyone can use it.
I have a quick question for you. Wonderful program, by the way. This is very eye-opening, and this should definitely be on everyone's phone and in every single screen at some point, just so we can definitely see the realism. But currently, I am working on a plan to create a a green energy plant for my city, and really try to reduce the carbon footprint here. Do you have any advice or anybody that you would prefer on in the network that I can speak out to? Because, you know, I think that the new buildings are very, very important, and there's going to be a huge push in development here. And it seems as if this would be a really great time to connect the two systems, since it seems like building development is going to be one of the biggest pros, it seems like. So is there anyone I can connect to that you would recommend?
Where are you located?
In Somersworth, New Hampshire?
I mean, there are lots of entities. You can look at ACEE, the American Council on Energy Efficiency. They have a lot of work on it, the EPA. I do some commercial building assessments. And I just read about a phenomenal Dutch company that's creating a product where they basically can take a commercial building, they using laser, guided devices to assess the building, and then again, using very sophisticated technology, produce a whole new facade for that building and just pop it on. You know, the doors and windows are cut out and open, and it's an extremely high insulation facade. And they'll take that building using the walls and the roof, and take it from being a relative energy sieve to being virtually, net zero, especially if they added photovoltaics. So that there are people and companies doing that. Unfortunately, that's in Holland, not here in the United States at the moment,
Right.
but I'm hoping that'll come here. But the bottom line is you want to exceed the energy codes that exist today. The Rocky Mountain Institute is another entity. If you want to look up those are all outside resources. But
What do you,
sorry.
what's your opinion on what Denmark did with the Copenhagen plant with the recycling facility? Do you think we should put one of those here, since, it'd be really nice to have a ski slope?
There's so many cool things going on around the world that, we need to adapt and take care. The problem we have is we're still having this debate about, and here in New Hampshire, I mean, it's extraordinarily frustrating that it's even a problem that we have to deal with. So we have a long way to go, but town by town, yes. This is no longer a solution. I should say this as I get a minute left, that this is no longer a solution that, we can solve ourselves. So my carbon footprint is very, very low. I drive an electric car, I have photovoltaics and solar hot water and a very efficient house. And yet that's not going to solve this problem. It's individual actions. It's too late. Even if everybody on this call just goes to net zero tomorrow, we're going to put an insignificant dent, as I hope you've seen from what we've looked at in this software. It's global and it has to be societal. And that's why the most powerful thing everyone on this call can do is talk to their senators and representatives and tell them they want to put a price on carbon, because dumping billions of tons of carbon into the atmosphere for free is what is our problem. And if we don't put a price on it, we're going to just keep doing it because it's free.
Right, because that's what Denmark did with their legislation. They demanded more leniency so they could get around a lot. And it seems like as soon as they did that, everything started to work for them.
Exactly.
And
it opens incredible entrepreneurial, opportunities and research and development. I mean, that's a huge part of this. I mean, I watch the battery market very closely because I'm an EV enthusiast and a PV enthusiast, and I've had batteries in my basement for years. And so the technology is going very fast, but if it were a higher priority and there were a carbon price, it would go many times faster. And that's what we need. We can't.
That's right.
What we're doing now is great, but it needs to be accelerated. And the most important thing we could do is put a price on carbon so that all of that R&D is shifted towards clean energy solutions instead of fiddling and diddling with dirty fuels.
I could pick your
I
brain
have
all
a
day.
question.
Thank you.
Great conversation. I think we better keep moving though, in order to have time for everything. I love this interaction though. Thank you all so much.
Can you just throw it in the chat and we won't lose it? We'll write it down.
Great. Yeah, thank you. So Paul Hawken, the Project Drawdown founder, says a strong carbon price will accelerate nearly every one of the 100 solutions described in this book, because it changes the fundamental market. People make decisions based on prices, and when there's a price on pollution, businesses and investors and individuals all try to reduce it because they try to reduce costs. So all of those technical solutions get accelerated simply by pricing carbon at the source when it enters the economy in the form of fossil fuels. So now we're going to shift gears a little bit and take a look at a little more carbon pricing in detail. And so the World Bank produces a state and trends of carbon pricing report every year. And it really offers a lot of hope. There are now 64 countries and regions that have a price on carbon. China did it last year for their whole industrial sector. Canada did a backstop measure to cover the 50% of their provinces and territories that weren't already pricing carbon a couple years ago. The US is one of only 2 countries out of all of the developed countries in the world that don't have a price on carbon. But with all this work happening, there are 2 problems with it. Only 20% of the world's fossil fuels are under any kind of carbon price. And the second problem is the price. So you can't probably read what's down here at the bottom because it's too small. These are countries and regions that have a carbon price across the horizontal axis. The vertical axis is the carbon price. It's the dollars per ton of carbon dioxide that's emitted. So if you burn a ton of coal, it releases about 3 tons of carbon dioxide because the oxygen atom is a little heavier than the carbon atom, and you're pulling 2 oxygen atoms from the air and binding it with a carbon atom to create CO2. So the 10 billion tons of fossil fuels that we burn a year become almost 40 billion tons of carbon dioxide. And once in the air, it stays there, a lot of it for centuries, unless we do something about it. Okay, so the price, $40 per ton of carbon dioxide, is the minimum price that the UN's high-level commission on carbon pricing, which is led by Joseph Stiglitz and Nicholas Stern, said in 2017 that we needed by 2020 in order to be on the path for the 2 degrees or 1.5 degrees limit. The range is $40 to $80 a ton, and that was on 100% of the carbon emissions from fossil fuels. So we're covering 20% of that, and the prices are here, and you can see most of them are short of the $40 per ton minimum needed. Why are these countries, even the ones that are able to price carbon, unable to reach the limit that we need? Of course, putting a price on pollution that's caused when you generate energy increases the costs of production. And so countries worry about leakage. They buy products from other countries that don't have a carbon price. They're producing emissions that they have no control over. And their own manufacturers become slightly less competitive as their energy prices rise in comparison to those free polluting countries. So the question is, how do we do this? We know the carbon price we need. The IPCC says it's up to a minimum of $135 per ton by 2030 to be on a safe emissions reductions path. But we have people that don't want to pay higher prices. Many will really struggle if they have to. We have businesses that want to be competitive in a global marketplace. And we have people that simply don't believe government can do anything right. And a combination of all of those has resisted putting in the necessary policies in place. So I brought an expert here to talk to us about this. Dr. Charles Wheelan is a senior lecturer and policy fellow at the Rockefeller Center at Dartmouth College. He joined the Dartmouth faculty full-time in June of 2012 and was awarded the Dean of the Faculty Teaching Award in 2020. He teaches a range of courses related to public policy and economics. Dr. Wheelan is author of several books on money and economics, including his first book, Naked Economics: Undressing the Dismal Science, which is now published in 14 languages. He is the founder and co-chair of Unite America, a movement of Democrats, Republicans, and independents working to put voters first by fostering a more representative and functional government. Dr. Wheelan holds a PhD in public policy from the University of Chicago, a master's in public affairs from Princeton University, and a Bachelor of Arts from Dartmouth College. Thank you for joining us tonight, Dr. Wheelan.
Thank you for having me. I think the important things have already been said. Carbon pricing is a foundational policy because it changes all else. And the key to carbon pricing is pricing the pollution into everything that we do. So you've already got the headline. I thought what I would do is put a finer point on that and talk about some of the political realities and how you might design a policy like that in New Hampshire, better yet in New England, better yet in the United States, better yet harmonized around the globe. Let me first just talk a little bit about communicating climate change. I'm not a climatologist, but I know that all of you are advocates for doing something around this issue. And I think the better that we can be about communicating this effectively, the more effective we're going to be in getting some kind of response. The way economists think about the world is that we don't have to know exactly what the outcome is going to be of some distant event. So as you've just heard in the climate models, there's a fair bit of uncertainty around warming itself, what the effects of warming will be, what our technological responses will be, what our adaptations will be. And I think the really dangerous thing is that this has been interpreted as some quarters as a reason for doing nothing. If we don't know exactly what's going to happen, well, then let's just wait and see. And that can actually pass for wisdom. In fact, it's almost insane. I'll give you some examples to put a finer point on. Suppose you go to your doctor and you're a 2-pack a day smoker. And you say to your doctor, what's going to happen to me? You're still healthy. And your doctor says, well, there are a lot of bad things that could happen. You could have a heart attack. You're far more likely to get cancer. And you say, but there's a possibility I might not get sick at all. And the doctor has to honestly concede, yeah, there are some 2-pack a day smokers who don't get sick, but a lot of them do, and they get really sick and they die. And you say, but you're not sure what's going to happen to me. And the doctor says, well, I'm not sure you're listening. Well, I'm fairly certain that this is going to turn out badly. And you say, well, you're not, until you're sure, I'm going to keep smoking 2 packs a day. And I would say that's about where we are right now. In the way economists look at the world is, you look at the range of possible outcomes. If there's a reasonable belief that some of those outcomes might be bad or very bad, then you protect against those outcomes. And the interesting thing is that most people do this instinctively in their private life. When I speak to groups, I will sometimes say, before I tell them what I just told you, how many of you think you're going to die next year? And no hands go, hopefully no hands go up. And then I say, how many of you have life insurance? And a lot of hands go up. And I say, well, that's kind of foolish, right? I mean, why in the world would you buy life insurance if you don't know if you're going to die next year? And at that point, I say, well, if I were to die, it would be really bad for my family and my kids couldn't go to college. And I say, all right, well, we should be in the business of protecting against outcomes that would be very bad or catastrophic. And climate change fits neatly in that bucket. I will add one other thing, which is I'm not sure that we learned one of the most important lessons from the financial crisis, which is when you look at the range of outcomes, that tail, what we now call tail risk, can be really, really bad. There were many people in 2005, 2006 saying that real estate prices were frothy. I was one of them. But there were very few people, and certainly not I, who understood how bad the various things that were going to happen related to falling real estate prices would be. And just to think about that, Bear Stearns is gone. Lehman Brothers is gone. Those are firms with very sophisticated risk models. And they said, yeah, there's a small possibility that certain things will happen and maybe they'll be bad. They grossly underestimated how bad that would be. And I would go so far as to say that most of Wall Street underestimated that. And if there hadn't been a significant intervention from the Federal Reserve and from Congress, Wall Street would have been wiped out. Now, just to bring us back to climate change, there is no Fed for the planet. There is no interstellar Fed that's going to come in and say, wow, you really messed this one up. We're going to bail your planet out. So we've got to take the probability of distribution seriously. We've got to take the tail risk seriously, and we've got to get better at explaining to people that that uncertainty is not a reason for inaction. And let me go one step further in terms of thinking about how economists understand the world. I spent a lot of time at the University of Chicago. It's the home of Milton Friedman. But what people misunderstand is that markets and capitalism do not mean that if you just leave everything alone, you get perfect outcomes. There's a lot of subtlety of thought that gets neglected. And in particular, if prices don't fully reflect the true cost of an activity, then actors behave in ways that don't make much sense. And again, you have to forgive some of the silly examples, but I do think they help help us understand what's actually going on. So imagine you've got a credit card where when you charge something, you only have to pay 50% of what you've charged. The other 50% is assigned to people you've never met. It just gets spread around the rest of the world. If you have to pay 100%, you think carefully about whether every dollar you spend is worth a dollar what you're getting. Well, if you only have to pay 50 cents on the dollar, then you start doing things that you wouldn't otherwise do. You buy things like, well, I don't know if I like this shirt. It's $100, but I only have to pay 50, so maybe I'll wear it, maybe I won't, right? You start acting somewhat recklessly. And that is exactly the problem with all of our behaviors that have negative environmental spillovers. It's easier to understand in the context of traditional air and water pollution. Many of you may know that the impetus for the Clean Water Act was when the Cuyahoga River caught on fire. There were many people in the environmental community who were aware of pollution in the Great Lakes. They were aware that all the industrial entities on the Great Lakes didn't have to pay for all the effluents they were dumping into the Great Lakes. But there wasn't a lot of action until literally the river caught on fire. And you don't have to be an ardent environmentalist to know that when a river catches on fire, you got a problem on your hands. Well, most of our, if not all of our environmental problems occur because you go out and you drive, or you use cement, or you eat beef, or you do anything else, and you kind of got that credit card. You're really only paying a fraction of the true social cost of your activity because those activities have environmental impacts, many of which involve carbon emissions. So big picture, we're only going to get a socially optimal result when each of us has to, what economists would say, internalize the true cost of our behavior. If you get in your car, yes, you pay for the car, you pay for the insurance, you pay for the snow tires, but at present, you don't pay for the carbon emissions. And making people pay for the carbon emissions is like taking that credit card and saying, I'm not taking it away from you, I'm just going to make you pay 100% of your own bill. And why carbon pricing is so foundational is that it then gets us to re-examine every facet of our life. This is why it is so much more effective than any individual policy. So the government can say, wow, every refrigerator sold has to be more efficient, or we're going to subsidize electric cars, or we're going to regulate methane emissions from cows. But there's either it becomes regulatory hell where the government is just kind of reaching into every facet of your life, or alternatively, we can impose a carbon tax at a very high level of production. So usually where fuel is created, so where oil is barreled, where electricity is made, so not at the consumer level, but where energy is created. And if you're burning coal, then your carbon tax is going to be higher. If you're burning natural gas, it will be lower. If you're using a non-carbon based energy, your carbon tax will be zero. And then the true price of every activity reflects the cost of the energy that you use because the carbon is accurately reflected in the cost of that energy. So let's go back to the electric vehicle example, which is terrific. But who subsidizes me for walking to work? Because that's a lot better than the electric vehicle. Or, and this is the closest I've come to violence probably in the last 6 months, and it may have been against one of your cars. I pulled up to the cleaners and there was a Tesla, and the license plate of the Tesla was what CO2? And what I wanted to do is storm in the building and say, whatever CO2 was released, making the electricity that you're running your car on. If you think that that is a zero emissions vehicle, you don't understand electricity. right? So now you would care more about it. You'd walk into the super, mind you, when I say you, I mean people beyond this group who care nothing at all about carbon emissions. And they're going to look at 2 sets of raspberries, one of which was grown locally, one of which was shipped across the country. And as soon as the fuel cost of that shipping is reflected in the cost of raspberries, they can say, wait a minute, I want the cheaper raspberries. And what are the cheaper raspberries? The ones that have a lower carbon content. So if you think about the range of behaviors that have to happen, and this is, I think, why John used the phrase foundational. We've got to live in smaller houses. We've got to live in more fuel efficient houses. We've got to drive less. When we do drive, we have to have more fuel efficient vehicles. We have to change our diets. We have to change the insulation in our home. The list is almost infinite. And the power of carbon pricing is that we have an incentive to do all of those things. So I grew up, my dad was a very frugal man. And when he air conditioned the house in the summer, he would come up to our bedrooms and he would shut the closet doors. And he would say, I am not paying to air condition your closets. And what carbon pricing does is kind of transform everybody into my dad, whether they care about climate change or not. And on the other side of the coin, which is the innovation that's necessary to provide alternatives to carbon, you get the same effect. Every product that is made with a carbon-free kind of energy, or carbon-free packaging, or less packaging, or less shipping, or more efficient shipping, all the ways that you can save carbon emissions and therefore money on the production side will be encouraged. One of the problems that we run into when we try and encourage alternatives to carbon-based fuel from the government level is we're passing out subsidies kind of without any sense of what the best technology may be. And that's not really when the market is working at its best. It would be far more efficient to say, look, here's the cost of using coal, here's the cost of using natural gas, here's the cost of using other energies. Now, if you can find something that avoids all those costs, knock yourself out. And suddenly all the innovative minds that have brought us social media companies and internet companies and new innovative products turn their attention to things that reduce carbon output. Why? Because you can make a lot of money by selling things, either cheaper energy, better packaging, products that have lower carbon content. It harnesses the incentives of the market to do everything that the people on this call care about, which is to reduce the carbon footprint. And it does so without having to pick winners. You're all familiar with the Solyndra debacle, where the government put a lot of money into solar. There is no need for those kinds of subsidies. There's still an important need for basic research, and we can talk about that in the Q&A if you want. But in terms of bringing products to market, raise the true cost of energy to what it should be to reflect its social cost, and then let the market deliver things that are now competitive because they're competing against the true cost of coal, not an artificially cheap cost of coal. We know that this works both because we've seen it operating in other countries. And one of the nice things about the carbon taxes around the world is we can look to places like British Columbia and other places that really have put a binding price of carbon on goods. And you see 2 things. One, the obvious, which is carbon usage comes down. Australia briefly had a carbon tax before they rescinded, and the response was quite significant. And also that the cost to the economy is less than the alarmists would suggest, in part because the market is so efficient at finding substitutes for something that is now more expensive. There's a similar example. There are some countries, Mexico, there's some places, Philadelphia, that have implemented sugar taxes on sugary beverages, so sodas, but also high sugar energy drinks. And we see 2 not surprising responses. One is that people's consumption of those sugary beverages comes down. There are quite significant health benefits for that. And it's also true that at the same time, and less intuitively, producers have re-engineered the beverages to lower their sugar content, right? What are they both doing? They're evading taxes. This is the one case where we really love when people evade the tax. How do you evade tax? By walking, by insulating your attic, by buying an electric car, by doing other things that lower your carbon footprint. Knock yourself out in terms of avoiding that tax. One of the reasons that our battle against smoking has been so effective, there have been lots of public advocacy campaigns and so on, the little warnings on cigarettes, but part of it is just price. Cigarettes are a lot more expensive than they used to be in several respects. One is cigarette taxes are dramatically higher than they were when I was growing up, but it is also true that the cost of smoking has gone up because now you got to walk outside your building if you want to smoke. And in New Hampshire, that means and you can't even stand near the entrance anymore, right? You got to go far out of your building in January and smoke. That's part of the cost of smoking. But so is, and we know, for example, that young people are particularly sensitive to prices. So when you raise the price of something you want to discourage, people do less of it. And that is at the heart of what makes the carbon pricing so foundational. Now, let me talk a little bit more about the specifics of how you need to implement a carbon price. I'm not an expert on what the right price ought to be. I would certainly be willing to go with the consensus from the climate change groups. My view is any price is better than no price, and up to a certain point, a higher price is better than a low price. I'll say a couple things though. One is any carbon tax needs to be phased in. Part of the power comes from the way that people respond. And if you go to $40 a ton tomorrow, people don't have an opportunity to respond. So it's only fair that you kind of phase it in. Both producers and consumers have time to adapt their behavior, adapt their products, and so on. Change, and that will change housing decisions and transportation decisions and consumption decisions and the like. It is also really important to note that a carbon tax is regressive, meaning that the burden falls more highly as a percentage of income on low-income people than it does on high-income people. So you have to be very cognizant of the fact that energy, both on the home heating and on the gas side, is a higher proportion of low-income people's budget than it is of higher-income folks, which is why I would subscribe to taking any carbon tax revenues and offering a refund. Either it can be directed, this is a policy choice, it can be directed to low-income folks. I think politically, one of the most elegant solutions is to take all your carbon tax revenues, divide by the number of people who have been taxed, and send out a uniform rebate. But you do have to address the regressivity of the tax. And it is best when it's harmonized across the broadest possible geographic area. I think there's nothing wrong with starting in New Hampshire, but I'd love to see it, as I said earlier, in New England. It would be great to see it across the United States. And as many folks have pointed out, it would be great to see it in other countries around the world, particularly India and China, which are big polluters. That is more feasible than it may seem. In particular, if the United States, Europe, Japan, and Australia were to cooperate on a harmonized carbon price, then one thing you can do is create a carbon tariff, which is to say countries that don't have a price on carbon have to pay the equivalent tax when they export their products to the United States. So if you export beef to the United States, we will tally, and there's more art than science this, but we will tally what we believe to be the carbon price in the production of that beef or that car or that cement. That's the tariff that you will pay, so that your carbon price is the same as if you had raised it in the United States and paid a carbon tax here, or Europe or Japan. That effectively harmonizes it across countries. And at that point, there's a very strong incentive for countries like India and China to impose their own carbon tax, because if they don't, they're paying the carbon tax to us on all their exports. So let me go back to the carbon rebate idea, because I think, as I said earlier, this is the one that I think that's the most political relevance. What you would do is gradually phase in your price on carbon, trend it towards what the experts believe to be the optimal carbon price, rising over time. Then you offer a carbon rebate. I would call it, by the way, a pollution tax. It's better than a carbon tax, and it actually describes what it is. And then call it the carbon rebate. That takes care of your regressivity problem, because it is also true that although high-income people spend less on energy as a proportion of their budget, they spend more in absolute terms than low-income people do. So this is actually going to, if you have the same rebate for everybody, it actually will end up transferring money from those who are relatively high income to those who are relatively low income. And let's think about the fairness. So everybody pays carbon tax on their life, and everybody gets a rebate. Now, if it turns out that your carbon footprint is exactly average, then what you pay in carbon tax will be exactly offset by what you get back in the rebate. If it turns out you got a small carbon footprint, like I suspect many of you do on the call, then what you pay in higher carbon taxes will be more than offset by your rebate. You're going to look forward to that rebate every year. It's going to more than compensate for the added cost of your food and fuel and home heating and the like. And if you turn out to have a really high carbon footprint, then what you pay in incremental carbon pricing will be greater than your rebates. And let's be honest, there's nothing wrong with that. That's certainly not going to violate any tenet of social justice. You are an above average polluter, and therefore what you pay because of the price of your social activity should be higher than people who are less than average polluters. So there is, I think, a very explainable sense of fairness to that, and it does take care of the regressivity problem. I also think once we can get by the climate deniers, there's an elegance to carbon pricing that should, in theory, appeal to both left and right. It appeals to the left for obvious reasons, which is it's the most powerful way to change behavior and ameliorate climate change. We're doing something significant. Less obviously, it is the most market-friendly way of dealing with climate change. Conservatives don't like regulation, and there's a lot of reasons that the government's not particularly good at telling us what to do. Conservatives don't like subsidies to companies, to individuals, kind of picking winners and sending out checks for assorted things. What they do like is the market. And what the carbon does is get us back to a world where you're paying $1 for $1 on your credit card. And when we get the price right, then the market delivers both cost savings in terms of reduced carbon output everywhere. When we look at raspberries, when we think about where we want to live, all the great things about markets are come to bear when you get the prices right. And at the same time, on the carbon alternatives, the carbon pricing encourages all the innovation that is the hallmark of markets. All these great minds go to work. They don't have the incentive to do that if carbon is not priced appropriately. So, and just as an aside, as I said earlier, I spent a lot of time at the University of Chicago. My thesis advisor was Gary Becker. His thesis advisor was Milton Friedman. So Gary Becker he inherited the mantle of Friedman as the spokesperson for the power of markets. Gary Becker embraced a carbon tax 25 years ago. He said, look, if you tax income, people work less. If you tax smoking, people smoke less. If you tax pollution, people pollute less. Let's tax the things we want to discourage and lower taxes on things we want to encourage. So this is a very market-friendly approach. And again, we're in a different political climate, but in theory, once you can get people to realize that the likely range of outcomes here is quite devastating, then there is a coalition that can be built between traditional climate activists and conservatives who are concerned about climate change, but don't particularly like a lot of government meddling. So I will stop there. I'd be happy to take questions about kind of the theory of carbon pricing or any of the mechanics of doing it and or the politics of trying to persuade people that this is a sensible policy.
That was wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Wheelan. Let's see, I haven't been watching chat, but I have a couple of my own questions. So maybe somebody who's reading chat can fire away. One of the things we hear on the news is we should be drilling our way to cheap gasoline. Can you talk about how a carbon fee and dividend might be a better approach as far as weaning us off of fossil fuels as opposed to drilling more?
What a carbon price does is say, all right, let's go to the least costly source of fuel, but as measured with carbon as well. So when the first reaction is, well, let's build a pipeline to Canada and get tar sands oil. Well, tar sands oil is fabulously dirty, right? And so that wouldn't be what we would do. When we think about drilling, we typically think, well, we have to drill shallow wells in Saudi Arabia. That's cheaper than Arctic wells. People only think about the cost of drilling, but you put carbon in and people say, well, actually, maybe we should insulate our attic in the direction of getting energy prices down. I think it certainly opens the door for nuclear. There are externalities there, but the technology on nuclear has changed dramatically. I think that's a discussion we might have. So what a carbon price does, it doesn't take drilling off the table, It just says, we're going to think about drilling in the full context of its social cost and see how it compares to our other alternatives. It's going to be less attractive, obviously, than it is in the absence of a price on carbon.
Thank you very much. Another question is, how do the effects of a federal windfall profits tax on fossil fuel production that would rebate revenue to families compare with a steadily rising, fully rebated carbon fee on fossil fuel production?
Yeah, so I can't, to me, a windfall profits tax doesn't do anything that we need to do. So for example, if energy prices are really low, energy companies don't make a lot of money, and there's a huge, so the profit tax wouldn't be very high. We wouldn't be seeing a lot of it, and we'd all be using energy with reckless abandon. So that's certainly not going to solve the problem. And when energy prices are high, that's a natural break on consumption, but profits may or may not be high. So it also doesn't change any of our behavior. I really don't like solutions that point to the oil companies as the bad guys, even as we sit here using their products. I mean, it's like a heroin addict blaming the dealer. And so a profit tax on energy companies might change their behavior, but it doesn't get me to insulate the attic. It doesn't get me to walk to work. It doesn't do any of the foundational things that we talked about with carbon pricing.
Thank you. Excellent. And one more question. Can you offer some recommendations for policies at the state level to help the state prepare for a federal carbon price?
Yeah, so I think the first thing you do is you get your apparatus ready for a state or regional carbon tax, because at that point, your industries are already years ahead in terms of thinking about where they're going to source their materials, how they might change their products. It's like giving your own industry a head start. Now, to be fair, you can't get too far out in front or industry is going to leave. You know, if it's $80 a ton for carbon emissions in New Hampshire and nothing in Massachusetts, then you're going to lose anybody who uses a significant amount of energy. But if it's $3, then $5, then $7, that basically gets them thinking about the changes that they're going to have to make. Then when the federal government says we're going to start phasing it in, it's going to be $3 next year and we're at $7, we are way ahead. At that point, it becomes a significant comparative advantage. And the same would be true. The United States is already kind of behind much of the world, but if we can move relative to other countries, that means that we have an advantage in terms of thinking about what a less carbon intensive future is going to look like.
Great. And one more, I don't know if you're familiar with the details of HR 17, but this is a state resolution against any carbon tax on transportation or electricity fuels at the state or federal level. And the majority committee report said, with the current high energy costs, record inflation, increasing supply chain issues and costs, along with our state having one of the lowest CO2 emissions in the US, we do not support any carbon taxes that will increase costs to the taxpayers of our state. Do you have any comments on that statement?
Well, so part of it's internally contradictory. I mean, if you have low CO2 emissions, then you're not going to have that much impact on all the things that they identify in the first half of the preamble, right? But as I said, it's really important to phase this in. So one hopes that all of the things you just described, we're going to have to act on inflation. The supply chain issues are going to resolve themselves. So I certainly wouldn't go to $40 a ton next week, heaping that on top of everything else. But by the time you phase this in a responsible manner, all of those transitory problems hopefully should have worked themselves out.
Terrific. Thank you so much. Reinmar or Susan, did you have any questions from the chat that should be asked?
I have a question, actually. Yes, Dr. Wheelan. Because it's essentially, well, if climate change is essentially a waste management problem, would it be correct to use the word fee rather than tax? I mean, the tax terminology seems to turn people off.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Don't use the word tax.
Is it possible to avoid that?
Yeah. No, a fee is both more attractive, and I think in New Hampshire in particular, people are a little more tolerant of user fees, because it really does, you know, you're going to put your boat in, well, you got to pay a user fee because you got a boat. And we're, vehicle fees and other kinds of things. So I think you make a very good point. I think a carbon fee is a both more accurate and more politic.
Yeah, I take my garbage to the municipal dump and I pay $3 a bag for it, and I don't think of it as a tax. I just think of it as managing my waste product. And so I don't understand really where the problem comes in that. I think people don't realize that it's a waste management problem.
Yeah, and I think you take it one step further, because you know already that I love these examples. Imagine a world in which there's no dump. You just kind of drive by the green and throw your trash out the window.
Yeah.
And say, like, I just don't understand why there's so much trash on the streets.
Thank you.
That's
Okay.
terrific.
So
Okay,
just a pragmatic question.
time for one
what-
more question. Go ahead, Susan.
What is the suggested speed of increasing the cost and of matching up what's going on in other countries?
That's a good question. And it's honestly, it's too technical for me, because you'd have to build into the legislation a couple things. One is, we don't really know, we can speculate, but we don't know exactly what the response is going to be. So if you've got temperature, I'm thinking kind of nationally or globally, if you've got goals for limiting the rise in temperatures and you don't get the behavior you want, then you might want to raise it faster. Or if people respond more quickly than you thought, then you might not have to raise it as fast. You also kind of want to monitor how it affects different groups of consumers, keeping an eye on those who are lowest income. So you kind of want to carve out, start with a path, and then perhaps adapt that path as you see responses. Parallel would be something like a cigarette tax. When we first started taxing cigarettes, they're an addictive product. You don't really know exactly what the behavioral response will be, and then you can adapt the tax to get the behavioral response that you want. But you're thinking it's the right question to ask. You're just going to need more response data as it goes along.
Are you taking more questions or are you shutting us off?
I think I'm going to shut you off. Thank you so much, Dr. Wheelan. I really appreciate your time
There's
tonight.
nothing like leaving people wanting more information on a carbon tax or on a carbon fee, right? That doesn't happen all the time.
We should do this every week, actually.
Okay.
Thank you
But
so
if
much.
you're listening, you're getting the recording. You'll get the link to that.
That's right.
Thank you guys so
Okay.
much.
But thank you for your work.
So let's see, where are we? I've pasted an elevator pitch version of the carbon fee and dividend with border adjustments policy into the chat. And so we've answered the question of what policies are needed for net zero by 2050. Let's turn for a moment to think about how we can get those policies put into place. How do we create the political will for legislation of the policies that we need? One way is to, give people an Inroads demo. It's free software you can run on any Chrome browser, on any computer. Show your friends, show your state representatives. Talking to people about the problem of climate change is our first important thing to do, but follow up with solutions. Talk about solutions, I think, is actually even more important, because most of us are worried about climate change. But we've been fooled by the fossil fuel industry into self-blame. We think it's our own carbon footprint that's the problem, and it's a market failure. It's the failure of the market to account for the costs of the pollution from fossil fuels in their price. So how do we fix that market failure? So my next paste into chat is an actions document. This is just a brief agenda and actions document, and I will share my screen now. And just go through a few of these things. Okay. Another really good resource is this economist statement. Dr. Wheelan is one of the 3,600 some US economists that have signed on to it, endorsing a carbon fee and dividend with border carbon adjustment approach. Just about every leading economist that I've ever heard of is on this statement. And you can get a list of all of the endorsers and search for New Hampshire or your favorite college or university. And it's pretty amazing who is on there. Okay, so there is a bill in Congress to do this called the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act. And how do we get Congress to do this? Well, they're just not hearing from enough people is really the problem. And businesses and community leaders, we need to be a squeaky wheel. So anybody can write Congress and the president and ask for carbon pricing, or specifically carbon fee and dividend, or you can call it carbon cash back, from this link. This goes to a Citizens Climate Lobby forum page that lets you pick if you want to write the president or Congress. You can type in your own message into the message body, but it provides one for you, which changes over time. Put this in your calendar and send yourself a reminder every month to tell Congress that you want to see effective climate action. Businesses and community leaders can endorse the bill at the website. Let's go there for a moment. The Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act is based on the carbon fee and dividend policy. I pasted a elevator pitch version of it. It's a steadily increasing fee on carbon charged to fossil fuel producers, basically at the choke points where their fuel enters the economy. So at coal mines, it's when the coal gets put on the truck, on the train. Oil refineries pay the carbon fee, and gas consolidators, the big compressors that pipe the gas out to the rest of the country. There's about 3,000 entities that would need to be charged this fee. And it would start at $15 a ton the first year of CO2, rise by $10 or $15 per ton of CO2 each subsequent year, depending on whether emissions reduction targets are being met, and sunset itself when in about 35 years after we've reduced emissions by 90%, and the dividend has dropped down to insignificant levels. And then it uses border carbon adjustments to protect US businesses' competitiveness in trade with free polluting countries. And also that strongly encourages every other country to match our carbon price. As far as harmonizing prices, Canada is using carbon fee and dividend right now, and they will reach US $135 per ton of CO2 in 2030, right in line with the minimum target the IPCC has set. The EU's carbon price recently reached about over $100. It's dropped down slightly since then. They're using cap and trade, so they have a variable price, but it's close to what we need also. So imagine a trading bloc with Canada, the European Union, and the United States all rising their carbon price along the same safe path, and forcing our trading partners to either pay us for their pollution or keep the money in their own economy and charge for carbon themselves. This is really a powerful first step. Okay, so you can endorse the bill as a community leader or a business simply with this button up here. If you're interested in how this might affect you financially, click on how it works and then click on the personal carbon dividend calculator, and it will ask you some information about your household and your energy usage, and it will tell you in the first year when there's a $15 per ton fee on carbon emissions from fossil fuels, how much you're coming out ahead. 2/3 of all families do come out ahead or break even when all the money is rebated equally back to all households each month. Okay, so get this thing out of the way again. So what else can we do? Let's talk about state actions for a bit. As I mentioned, there is a House resolution, HR 17, and it looks like it will be voted on by the whole House on Thursday this week, the 31st. In the committee, the public really did not want this resolution to go anywhere. 149 people registered to oppose the resolution against 4 who supported it. You can see the text of it here. If you want to learn some of the arguments that against this resolution, 2 Concord Monitor op-eds were in there, and there's a PDF if you don't have a license or to get through the paywall, around the paywall, you can look at it there. But give your state representative a call before Thursday and ask them to reject HR 17. There's a carbon cashback program in New Hampshire where towns are voting on whether to ask the state and federal legislators to pass carbon fee and dividend legislation. So you can go to carboncashback.org to learn about it. You can find if your town has been one of the ones that has voted already, down near the bottom of the homepage. Some of the votes have been absolutely incredible. Look at this, Holderness passed it 200-5. Jackson, I read Jackson's town report. It actually said it was unanimous, but our town champion who put it on the warrant said it was 100-3. So anyway, that's pretty good political will for carbon cashback. You can do this in your town. Come to this website, read about the benefits of the bill and the policy. You can go to the policy page. I don't know if Dr. Wheelan knows that he's on here. I probably should have asked him. I think I did ask him. He made a 6-minute video for us about carbon fee and dividend with border carbon adjustments. And then there's a whole bunch of more information on the policy page, including that US economist statement. Okay. Here's another project that would be pretty easy to do. Send your library an email or give them a call and ask them to put together a climate display for Earth Day or Earth Month. April's coming up. They've surely got some climate books. They're looking for ideas. There's a whole list of climate books and some other materials that they might find useful. I just watched a YouTube video about holding the fossil fuel industry accountable for their last 30 years of lying about the problem that they knew about and holding them accountable for that, which is also important. We've been talking about mitigating future pollution and pulling some of the CO2 out of the air. There's 1 trillion tons of carbon dioxide in the air now more than there were 150 years ago from burning fossil fuels. And that's going to cost us a lot. So our New Hampshire State Attorney General should probably get involved in that pollution problem. And as I said, just talking with people about climate change, market failures, and carbon cashback is, I think, the most important thing we can do. So I'll put this link in the chat one more time. And I think it's time for me to thank you all for spending your evening with us tonight. This is important stuff for ourselves and our children and our grandchildren. And I really appreciate that all of you got together to learn more about what each of us can do to help address climate change.
Thank you very much, you guys. I appreciate it.
Okay. Stay on for just a couple secs for previews of coming attractions.
Thank you, John, and thank you to our speakers. And I just want to sorry.
Okay, well, Reinmar's getting up the slides.
Go ahead, Susan.
Okay, well, Reinmar's getting up the slides. First of all, our 10 Towns Toolkit launch in February has now got us up to 17 towns, over 900 people impacted. And instead of 10 actions, we've got 29. We need someone to think of the 30th action. So we know that we are making a difference in New Hampshire, sometimes starting at grassroots levels. And hopefully John gave us lots of ideas for how to work at the New Hampshire and US levels. The plastics work group meets every other Sunday. And here we go. There we go. Plastic work group next meets April 10th at 6 p.m. And we also have a legislation work group that meets once a month. Its next meeting will be April 12th at 7. At the bottom of this slide, it says newhampshirenetwork.org. That's all you need to remember. Anytime you want to find any event at all, you will, you'll find the link to it there. The plastics work group is also working on starting a youth summit, which will happen in the fall. So there were some questions in chat about how do we share this with schools and young people. That is a way to do that. Okay, continue to the next one. So our legislative work group meets monthly to talk about what is happening in the House and the Senate, but very specifically, Joe Kwasnick, who has really been our State House watcher, is going to give us an event on Monday, April 11th. We've got a number of representatives and a senator from Concord coming to talk to us about crossover season, the bills that made it past the first half of the legislative season go the House bills to the Senate bills to the House, and we see what survives, which are the ones we want to support, and which are the ones we hope will turn into princes and not stay beastly. So that's it for that slide. And finally, we are planning another summit in June. We had one last year. It was really fun. It was in person. We hope we can do that again. And everyone was really brainstorming where we want to go for the next year. And this year, we also hope to maybe talk about a new focus for the whole year. So we hope that you'll keep an eye on that. And once again, newhampshirenetwork.org. And Reinmar, I think I'm done. Back to you.
Yep. Very good. Thank you all so much for coming and for being with us. It's wonderful to see so much interest, and we will try to answer questions that were in the chat that we didn't get to, and email people. But in any case, everybody will get a link to a recording, and so you'll be able to catch up, and you can share that with others if you like. So thanks once more to all our speakers, to John, to Susan, and we will see you next time. Take care, everybody. Be healthy.